We spent some time in the Old Testament. Now we're going to go into the New Testament. And this morning's lesson entitled is "A Sinner Serves Christ." It comes out of the book of Luke, 7th chapter. And we start in verse 36. And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. This is speaking of the Pharisee was desiring to eat with Jesus. And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with the hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. What is a Pharisee? That's who our lesson is kind of speaking about here at the beginning. What do we know about Pharisees?
Religious leader.
Religious leader. We know this one desired to have Jesus at his house to eat. Why do you think he invited Jesus to come to his house to eat?
Curiosity.
Curiosity? Doesn't seem that he's a believer, because he doesn't think that Jesus is even a prophet. Well, in my Bible index, it speaks of Pharisees, and it says characteristics of the Jewish sect, upholder of traditions, sticklers for Mosaic law, very careful in outward details, right, rigid in fasting, zealous for Judaism, lovers of display, covetous, cruel persecutors. Then it goes to the next, it says chief errors of their outward righteousness, blindness to spiritual things, as this Pharisee certainly was, emphasis on ceremonial law, perversion of Scripture, self-justification before men, hindering potential believers, refusal to accept Christ. So they give a lot of definitions for Pharisees, and Pharisees are mentioned often in the New Testament. In fact, they said when the Pharisees were very forward in the Jewish sect, there would be about 6,000 of them. So there was a large number of them. And but we have a Pharisee this morning that he desired to have Christ come and eat with him. And we don't know, the scriptures don't tell us why he invited him to his table, but it seems that he was wanting to find out some things, maybe who Jesus really was. He didn't believe that he was the Messiah or the Christ. And so we'll look at it this morning in this morning's lesson. So as he invites Jesus to come to eat with him, he's interrupted. And this woman, it says the woman of the city. We don't know her name. And there's other scriptures that tell of certain situations almost as this one is, but I don't believe it's Mary Magdalene or maybe one of the others, but the scriptures just doesn't give us her name, but it says she was a woman of the city. And so she came and uninvited, came to the meal, and of course the people would have all noticed, and it says that she came and she stood at Jesus's feet. And so she came particularly to see Jesus. She didn't come to see the others, but she came to see Jesus, and she stood at his feet. And in that day when they would eat together, they would lay down and probably have a mat or a pillow or something in front of them, and they would lean on their arm or elbow, and their heads would be toward the center, and they would eat that way. So his feet would have been back behind him, and she would have been able to stand behind him when she came. It says when she came, she washed Jesus' feet with her tears. And so we don't know about this woman of just who she was, but the Pharisees seemed to know her. He said she was a woman of the city, and the one writer said that he probably knew her, just who she was. And we don't know that she just the sins that she was involved in, but she was probably a prostitute. And but her heart was changed, and she didn't come to be recognized by those who gathered at the meal, but she came to pay homage to Jesus, her Lord. And she had probably heard him sometime or other to know the message of salvation, and she was just tired, or she was just sick of the kind of life she had lived. And at the end of the scriptures, it tells that her sins were many. So she did sin greatly. And so she comes to Jesus, and she weeps, and her tears fall on his feet, and she wipes the tears with her hair. And you know, in this lesson, we don't have of her ever saying a word. We don't know anything she ever said. And maybe she didn't ever say anything. We don't know that. But she didn't need to, because she was showing what had happened to her in her heart. And so she not only washed Jesus' feet with her tears, but she wiped his feet with her hair. And that might have been another reason of how she was recognized, maybe the way she was dressed or the way she looked. And but she not only wiped his feet with her hair, but she also had a box of ointment, a very costly perfume, and she put that on Jesus's feet. And not only doing that, but she said before she put the ointment on his feet, she kissed his feet continually. And of course, this got the best of Simon the Pharisee, and he said if Jesus would have really been a prophet, he would have known who she was, and he wouldn't have left her even touch him. And that was one of the sticklers of the Pharisees. They didn't come in contact with sinners as far as touching them or other minute things. But so he didn't believe that Jesus was even a prophet, because if he would have been, he would have known. And so we go on then to verse 40. And Jesus answering said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And he saith, Master, say on. There was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence, the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him most? Simon answered and said, I suppose he to whom he forgave most. And he said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house, thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she has washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. So Jesus gives a parable here for the sake of Simon, to let him to know that this woman cometh, a woman of the city, a sinner, but she came as a saved person. And of course, Simon the Pharisee, he believed he was a saved person also. And but he didn't do any of the courtesies to Jesus that this woman did. And that was a culture of their period of time in their area, that when a person would come to eat, that they would wash their feet, them, or they would have a servant to wash their feet. This Pharisee did not do that. Also, when they would come, they would give him a kiss. The Pharisee did not do that. And also, they would anoint them. The Pharisee did not do that. And so Jesus was giving a parable here to say that this woman, she had sinned greatly, and she was not paying for her sins because she could not do that. But she had many. The Pharisee, who probably did not sin as greatly as the woman had, but he had still sinned, even though he didn't recognize it of himself. He thought he was above sin or better than sin, and he did not understand that all men are born into sin. And so he gives this parable that this debtor, who, as we look at, is referred to the Pharisee and the woman, and the creditor would be Christ, and they both owed him a certain amount. Said that the one debtor owed 500 pence. That would be equal to 500 days' wages in their time. So that would be a great debt. And that the other debtor owed 50, which would be 50 days' wages. And so Jesus's reference was that the Pharisee owed 50 pence for his debt. The woman owed 500 for her debt, and then neither one could pay their debt. Just like you and I, for the sins we have committed, we can't pay for it. We can't pay a debt for that. Jesus went to the cross and paid the debt for us. And so it says here that the creditor forgave them both, just as Christ has forgiven us. And he asked the Pharisee, well, who do you suppose would love me the most? Who would love the creditor the most? The one that owes 500 pence or the one that owes 50? And, he was pretty reluctant, evidently, to even answer that, but he did. He said, I suppose the one that owed the 500 would love more. And, of course, Jesus says, you have rightly gave the correct answer. And so he was giving reference here to the love of this woman who had done everything she could there for Jesus. And he was also referring to the love of this Pharisee. Yes, he did invite him to dinner, but we don't know the intentions of his invitation, or why he invited him. And so he was referring to that she would love him much more because of the debt that was paid for her sins. And in verse 48, and he said unto her, thy sins are forgiven. And they that sat at meat with him began to say within themselves, who is this that forgiveth sins also? And he said to the woman, thy faith has saved thee. Go in peace. So probably at the table there was probably other Pharisees there also. It says there were others there, and they wondered too what manner was this man that he could forgive sins. And of course we know there's no one else that can forgive sins except for Jesus. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man can come unto the Father except through me. And so Jesus was trying to get through to this Pharisee here as such. And what comment or what questions would you have about this morning's lesson?
It seems like the Pharisee did not have much respect for Jesus because of the way he treated him when he came to his house. That standard procedure to greet them and wash their feet off seemed like his motive might have been more criticism to begin with, anyhow, than just being kind.
Well, I'm sure he would have known all of these things that he should have done.
Yeah.
Being a Pharisee, he would have definitely known. Rhonda?
I was going to say, I was thinking when Jesus talked to the woman here, and she said, thy sins are forgiven. when he talked to the woman at the well, didn't he say, "Go and sin no more"? But he didn't tell this woman, like, go and sin no, or send her off with that thought or whatever. I just kind of found that interesting.
Well, Jesus knows the heart, and maybe the woman at the well could have had a problem in her life that Jesus knew that needed to be curtailed and to watched over. And if this woman, she might have been so sick and tired of her life that she would no way ever go back to it. But I think it's very interesting that the thought that the Pharisee had about Jesus not even being a prophet, not knowing this woman, Jesus knows the very thoughts of people without him even verbally speaking them. Jesus knows your thoughts and he knows my thoughts. He knows if you're thinking about this lesson or if you're thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. He knows if we're thinking about what we're going to do this afternoon. But Jesus knows all that. And it helps us, I think, in our lives if we remember that Jesus does know our very thoughts. And if we want to follow after him and do the things that he wishes for us and commands us, why, that'll help us to do what's right.
One more thought I had too was when this Pharisee invited Jesus over, and obviously other Pharisees or important people over, I just found it odd that he let this woman who he did not think highly of to just come in his home. Like, if you invited friends over and some strange woman just walked in your house, you know what I mean? I don't know, would we welcome someone like that today? I don't know. I just found it odd that he let her in. What'd you say?
There was a statement in there in the lesson about that, it was kind of like a public meeting, more or less, and the outside courts or something, they would let people come in. There wasn't something in there about that. It did state that.
But I'm sure to this Pharisee that was a big interruption to the meal he was putting on for.
But the lesson don't talk about multiple people. The lesson talks about a Pharisee, a woman, and Jesus, and that's it. Now, what do we take from that?
Mm-hmm.
We talk about 10 people being there, 13 people. It doesn't really. He said a Pharisee invited Jesus to his house. A woman walked in.
So it made it pretty personal. And how do we do as Christians? Do we invite Christ in for our dinner and then not invite him to all the other activities, work, things of our life? Or is Christ a part of everything that we are and that we do? Anything?
I had a thought. The Pharisees' statement that if Jesus was a prophet, he would have known who was touching him seems to suggest that the Pharisees' understanding of what created righteousness in a human being was off. Because under the Jewish law, they would have been following a bunch of steps and checking the boxes, and in their minds, doing those things is what gave them righteousness or holiness. But Jesus understood that the only righteousness that we truly have comes from God, because our own check the box style of righteousness is tainted by our sin nature, and that's not acceptable before God the way that Jesus is. So I feel like, you know, that might be why the Pharisee made that statement toward him, because he didn't have a right understanding of what actual righteousness was and how to obtain it.
That the Pharisee did not have an understanding?
Right.
Okay. Okay. Well, he certainly didn't do the things that a Pharisee should have done, so he either didn't understand or he chose to not do it. Anything else?
There's a song out about this woman that did this. It's called The Alabaster Box, I think it is. That he kept her tears.
Mm.
So it says in the lesson here, it says that the dinner was for invited guests, but was not completely private. Others could enter the room and sit around the perimeter while observing and listening in on those involved. There you have it.
Okay, any other comments? Well, let's invite Christ to our dinner and to every other activity we do in our lives. And go and have a good week. See you next Sunday.
Thank you, Claire.
Mm-hmm.